هرمي كل اتكالي عليك. نبدأ مع بعض. 1 2 3. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة. انا سلمتك كل حياتي وبقول دايما تبقى مشيئتك، اصلا انا حتى بقلبي الخاطي جربت حنانك وعرفتك. انا سلمتك كل حياتي وبقول دايما تبقى مشيئتك، اصلا انا حتى بقلبي الخاطي جربت حنانك وعرفتك. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة. كل يقين ان انت معايا، واثق في اللي بتختاره ليا، ما انت في ضعفي بتبقى حماية، وطريق الخير ترسمه ليا. كل يقين ان انت معايا، واثق في اللي بتختاره ليا، ما انت في ضعفي بتبقى حماية، وطريق الخير ترسمه ليا. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة. قلبي بيصرخ لك وينادي انك تقبل تدخل بيتي، وان كنت انا بعتك في الماضي ابارك انت عمري الآتي. قلبي بيصرخ لك وينادي انك تقبل تدخل بيتي، وان كنت انا بعتك في الماضي بارك انت عمري آتي. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة. هرمي كل اتكالي عليك وعلى كلامك هرمي الشبكة، كل حياتي ملك ايديك، ايد مين غيرك تدي البركة.
Good. Are we going to start right away? Come, let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. We glorify your holy name and we worship you. We praise you and we ask you to come and bless us. You promised when one or two gather in my name, I'm in their midst, and here we are. We're waiting for you to come and be in our midst and bless us. Give us a word. Give us guidance and wisdom. Give wisdom to the speaker, and those who listen, that doesn't become only words, that it's something that we can benefit and use in our life, that we may be edified and understand through the intercession of Saint Mary, Saint Mark, and all your saints. Hear us, God, when we pray thankfully. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Introduce you? Oh, you want to introduce me now? So we're blessed to have Dr. Mina Boutros. I've known Mina for a while. I think when you started enter medical school. And I'm delighted that he chose psychiatry. And I think maybe, I don't know if you remember the conversation or not, when I told you, what are your thinking? You mentioned I'm between psychiatry or something else. I told you, please, psychiatry. Maybe you don't remember that. That's how much we need this kind of help. I know we have a few people, they're in the area, Mariam, Mary, Diana, myself, a few people in the field. But it's not enough. In our church, it's not enough. What even made it more interesting when I heard the topic, it's about electronics. And electronics, we think only kids struggle with, but it's actually we all struggle with. We all can become addicted to it. We can all are challenged by it. I'm glad Mina is giving this talk today. I asked him, is it relevant to us high school to join? He said, this is relevant to everyone. That's why I brought the high schoolers, and we switched to that tonight, and instead of doing Bible study, we'll listen to the talk, and then we'll resume next week. So I hope you benefit, pay attention, ask questions. It's not like that easy. Right now, to get an appointment with a psychiatrist, it takes about 3-4 months, if not more. So to have someone in front of you explaining and talking, and you'll be able to ask questions, this is priceless. So please pray for Mina and Dr. Boutros, and may God give you guidance and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Abuna. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. I hope this is educational. I hope it's edifying. I hope you gained something today that hopefully you can carry with you moving forward. Today's topic is about electronic use, basically all of the technology that has become an integral part of our day-to-day lives, something that, despite some of our best efforts, we're constantly intertwined with. And really what I wanted to get at today is this idea that it's not something that we should find entirely bad. It's not something that is entirely good. There is a balance between what is a helpful, what is a productive use of the electronics and technology in the world around us, and when does it get to be a problem, and how do we address those things? To be completely fair, a lot of this has been geared towards parents with kids, particularly those with kids on the younger side, but I promise you, having learned a lot just putting it together, that I think regardless of how old you are, whether you're in high school, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, you'll find something that I hope will be helpful throughout this presentation. So with that, I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself. So I was born in Egypt. I grew up most of my life here in Massachusetts. So I watched technology as it came about in one of the most, I would say, fast-moving states in the US right now. I ended up going to Boston University for undergrad, where I studied biomedical engineering. Had a lot of shifts in life where I realized that mental health and healthcare in general are particularly important, and ultimately went to medical school at UMass. So since then, I started residency with a focus in neuropsychiatry. Basically what this means is we look at neurology and psychiatry. In my personal and humble opinion, and many people will think the same, I believe, the two are very closely connected. You know, when we experience things that affect our minds, they're also there likely as a result of the way they impact our brains. And what I hope to gain over the course of the next 6 years I'm there is a better understanding of what all of that means. and how can we use that to better each and every one of our lives. So going into,
This.
sure,
I think this one is. Can you hold this?
yeah.
Put it here. Let's try. You can put it in your book.
Can you guys hear me?
Good. Is that better?
Any echo? How's that? Better?
Good.
Okay, we'll zip up. So going into our plans for the night, I always like to start presentations with a general idea of what we will be expecting and what we'll be going through tonight. Essentially what I want to do is start from kind of a broad look at what are our beliefs around things around us, specifically as they pertain to, again, electronics and technology. How do we look at these things, particularly from the lens of CBT, one of the hallmarks of modern day psychology? And then we want to move down into what is the current stage that we're all working in? What is the technological stage? How have we gotten to the point that we're at? And what does it look like? And how does it look different than what we've been at before? I then, again, looking at the balance between the two, want us to look at this idea that there are a lot of benefits. There's a wonderful world that we live in as a result of much of the technology that has advanced. And then I want to look at what happens when it falls off of that level. What happens when it's no longer benefiting us? When is it no longer helping people and, in fact, sometimes making our lives harder or more difficult? From there, I'd like to give a few just key ways that we can address these things, take home points and tools that you can consider in your own lives and things that I consider in my own life as well. And then really just kind of wrapping things up with this idea that you'll notice throughout the whole entire presentation, which is there's nothing in this world, realistically for most of us, that we need absolutely none of, and very little that we need a lot of. And what we really need to find more often than not is that middle path, that narrow gate for most of the things that we experience in this life. Before I go any further, I want to ask all of you all, I know some of you are here from high school, many of you are parents with kids. I just want to hear shout outs. How old are some of your kids? Just an idea of what we're working with here. I see 14. Okay, young, so in like the elementary age. 18, 14, so in their teens. Okay, so 7, 8, and 11, so right in this like cusp of the young and approaching middle school age. 12 and 13. Okay. So a lot of range is looking like a lot of the folks here have kids who are in the range somewhere between that like elementary age all the way up until high school, and some less than that, and some college as well. But I do want to focus, I saw that it was alluded to, some are even younger than that, and there are some tools that we'll talk about that really should be applied even as young as preschool and even before that. And now I'm curious, for those of you who have kids, and for those of you who specifically have given your kids cell phones and other tools like that, at what age, and maybe from some of the high schoolers, did you get cell phones? Did you get access to the entire world of the internet as we know it? Anyone? 12, 13, 14? What's that? Okay. Well, we'll talk about that. Okay. 12. Okay, so I'm hearing a lot of people probably around that like middle school, around the time of puberty. Okay. So it's something that we want to keep in mind, especially when we consider just how much technology has advanced recently. And then again, from the crowd, what I'm curious about, so that we can talk a little bit more about it later on, what are the things that you're most concerned about with electronics? What are the things you're most concerned about the internet, the use of technology, both in yourselves and in your kids if you're parents? Brain development is a good one. Screen time is very, yeah.
The kind of content that you
Exactly.
That hooked on different, you know how the algorithm works, you know?
Yeah.
How many seconds or milliseconds you glimpse at an ad and that takes you to another, so the content as well.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think most of those things, I'm sorry? Yep, so changes in how we act and interact with the world.
I guess like right now technology is getting so advanced, like now we have personal assistants
Hmm.
that you tell it to go shopping and it brings you all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not when you go shopping. Tesla's invention.
Yeah, so something we talk about actually when, so you can call it laziness to some extent, but it's really at its core kind of a displacement of responsibility, basically taking things off of ourselves and putting it onto other systems. Okay, so these are all very important things we'll plan to touch on. So the idea of the development, how these things are impacted, the idea of the content, the amount of time that we spend, how this might impact our responsibilities and the way that we act. And I invite you all, regardless of whether you speak English, Arabic, or another language entirely, to try your best to kind of jump in wherever you can and hopefully get whatever you need out of the rest of this talk. So next up, what I want us to talk about a little bit more is starting with this idea of things being all good or all bad. So William Shakespeare, I think, puts it quite nicely. He says, "There's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So it's this idea he's expressing that in this world, there are so many things that we can often see as entirely negative or entirely positive. For example, if you're a parent and you see that your kid is spending all day playing video games on their Xbox, their PlayStation, whatever it might be, when you think that this is a problem and it's causing them issues and they're not doing their schoolwork and all of that, that's what's causing us to start labeling this as something that you want them to stop entirely, something that is entirely bad for them. But if instead you took a moment and thought, in this modern age, this is how my kid, my son, my daughter, whoever it might be, engages with their friends, this is how they communicate, this is how they learn strategy, this is how they learn how to work in teams, at least in this stage while they're home perhaps, then you'll start to think about it in a little bit of more positive light. And really what I'm trying to get at is this idea that neither one of these two ways of thinking about it is entirely perfect. Things are neither all bad or all good. But when you look at a situation, for example, whether it's your kid playing video games or even if you see them reading, and if your thought, let's say for example you take reading so that we oppose it to what we just talked about with playing video games, something that most of us instinctively kind of look down upon. If your thought is, I see my kid is reading all the time, why isn't he playing with his friends? He's doing this too much, he's isolating himself. You could also very likely see this in a negative light. The issue then is what happens when we react, and what happens when our actions kind of show what are these sometimes negative thoughts and emotions towards what they're doing. And these result in emotional, physiological, meaning changes in the body, as well as behavioral responses. And this connects us to the idea of CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. This is one of the hallmarks of psychological therapy in the modern age. What it looks at really is this connection between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior, and how all three of these things are very intricately related. The reason that I bring this up is because when we approach both ourselves and our loved ones, whether they're kids or other people that we care about, with regards to potentially problematic use of electronics or technology, we really want to slow ourselves down and start to think, what are my thoughts about this? Where am I getting these thoughts from? How do they make me feel? And as a result of how they make me feel, what are my behaviors? And when we think about these, not just as our internal thought and feeling and behavior triangles, but also looking at them as they connect to other people, that's when we start to think about how my behavior, let's say I had a kid and I yelled at them for playing video games, how could that potentially impact them? For a kid, imagine you were playing video games and you found it enjoyable and you were learning and connecting with your friends, your classmates, and then your parents are telling you absolutely zero video games, you can't do this anymore, and you take a very harsh approach to it. Even let's say you do the same thing with their cell phone use, communicating with their friends and family. From the kid's perspective, their thought will also kind of mirror what yours are. They'll mirror this kind of idea that, there's a negativity coming across. They'll think my parents disapprove of me, there's no reasoning, and then maybe they'll start to feel, this isn't fair. Maybe they'll start to feel like they can't share, they'll feel like they're isolated. You feel like you're kind of alone when people really push you out instead of trying to understand. And as a result of that, if you have kids where you're constantly pushing them without offering that understanding, without offering that kind of listening ear before you tell them to do things or before you make decisions, very often what they'll do is rebel. Perhaps they'll hide these things, perhaps they'll do them behind your back, perhaps they'll just feel bad about them and, talk to their friends about the way that they're kind of persecuted, so to speak, in their own home. And I want us to take this idea and kind of roll with it as we start to think about how these things have become more and more applicable to us in our everyday homes. How is it that we need to start thinking about our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior with our own phone use, with our own electronics use, the use of the internet? And before we do that, I want to take us back just a little bit to kind of put into context just how much has changed in the past 20 years or so alone. When we look at technology, I think many of you will recognize, a little blurry, but this home desk station that was kind of iconic in the early 2000s where you had an old dial-up modem and it took 30 minutes to get on the internet. Things were kind of slow, but this was sort of the introduction to what we see now with much greater speeds. But even before that, we look at the first phone being invented in 1876. We're talking about well over 150 years ago, the start of this kind of technological wave. But then you get to mobile phones, the cell phones of the very early ages in the 1970s. These are things that happened almost 100 years after the first phone. There was a lot of room for people to start to grow and develop and understand how they use these technologies. But as you'll start to notice, these timelines after that are much closer together. You'll get then one of the first and most popular video game systems in the early 1980s. Less than 10 years after that, the internet was developed. A few short years after that, the average home had the first start to their access to the internet. And less than a decade after that, you had the first iPod, one of the first systems where you can have in your own personal home as much of the music collection, as much as the information, the entertainment that you wanted on the go. And then very quickly, these next few steps are ones that really revolutionized the internet and technology as we know it. Social media started to pop up in the early 2000s. YouTube came up shortly after that. We had the first smartphones in 2007, all of these things within less than 5 to 10 years. Netflix started streaming online in the same year. And then even just a few years after that, we see the advancement of each and all of these technologies, with, in the back of these companies' minds, the idea that they want you to use these things, they want you to be engaged, they want you to provide for their business. And then later on in the early 2010s, you start to see that technology starts to advance, not just to personal entertainment, not just to the things that we have at work and at home, but also all the way around us. In our cars, in our thermostats, in the way we control our lighting, it really does start to feel like there's technology truly everywhere. From there, in 2016, we had the invention of TikTok. And now, as we know, this is a platform that, it takes up a lot of people's time, but it also provides a lot of ideas. It also provides a lot of information that otherwise some people may or may not ever get. but it's something that we have to approach with caution, something that we have to consider before our ready use. And really nowadays, what we look at is this idea that so much of this, much unlike the computer that you see here, the computer of the early 2000s, all of these things are instant. All of these things happen to connect as quickly as possible. You're able to get this instant gratification, one notification after another. You're able to go from one video to the next, and that's part of what really hooks us. It's part of what, in many situations, concerns people about their technology use. But I want to give you an even further historical understanding that this is not the first time that people have been afraid of the technology around them. Back there you see a statue of Socrates. He was one of the most influential philosophers in really any part of human history. He really changed the way that we ask questions, really changed the way that we think about thoughts themselves. And reading and writing wasn't quite popular when Socrates was doing some of his most influential work. And as it became to come about, he was one of the first people to say, this is not something that we should be doing. If people start reading and writing, they're going to have weaker memories. They're not going to have true understanding. They're just going to be reading off of their books. And this is a technology that now, in hindsight, we value being able to read and write. We appreciate that we have this ability and that this technology, so to speak, is so common amongst us. But again, it's something that caused them fear and concern when it first came out. Likewise, when telephones first invented in the 1870s, people were afraid that the users would be able to, or would lose their ability to speak effectively, to have in-person communications, because so much of it was being lost over the phone, and you weren't experiencing body language, you weren't experiencing the interactions between people. And again, even more recently, the advent of texting has become something that people were often afraid of. People were afraid that the kids, myself included, would not be able to read and write because they were constantly using shorthand in their texts. And the reality is, a lot of these things, though they came with some potential negative impact, also had a tremendously positive impact on the world around us. Now, bring it back to the current time and place. What I want us to look at is ourselves. And this next question is one that sometimes upsets me when I have to ask myself, but how much time do we really spend with our screens? Does anyone have the Screen Time app? Does anyone have an idea of how long they usually spend on their phones? Not sure. I heard a long time coming from over there. Very accurate. Yeah. Above 2 hours is almost certain. But exactly. That's what I'm asking. Do you? So I'm trying to focus here on general screen time. Work screen time, if we were focused just on, the adults, that would be a very different conversation, because the reality is we use computers, we use technology basically all day. I'll tell you right now, maybe 70% of my job is writing on a computer, just typing away. And it's an unfortunate reality, but again, one that helps out, because likewise, we look at the pros and cons. I don't want to spend all day on the computer writing about patient appointments, but for the next visit, for the next provider, having that documentation is absolutely invaluable for this patient's continuum of care. So again, it's tough to say, but the reality is, if we include work and school, we spend a lot of time on the computer. We really do, whether it's computers, phones, etc. Do you have an idea? Yep. Exactly. Yeah, so the reality is a lot of us use our phones, computers quite a bit. And I'll bring it to not just the people in this room. I'll tell you right now, just like many of you, I would be embarrassed to tell you exactly how much time I spend on my phone. I will tell you, putting together this presentation, I spent more time on my phone than I would have liked. I spent maybe more breaks than I would have liked. And the reality is we have to figure out, how do we address this? But first we have to figure out what's causing it, how much is there, when does it become a problem? So how much do people on average spend on screens? Based on a 2021 poll, the average amount of time that somebody between the ages of 16 and 64, so the vast majority of us in this room, is about 7 hours every day is spent in front of a screen. Now, this is including work, this is including phones, but the reality is it's still about 30% of your day is spent using a phone. When you look at considering the fact that somebody on average sleeps about 8 hours every day, now you're talking about 40% of the time that you are awake, you're spending in front of a phone. And unfortunately for many of us, it could be much more than that. For some folks that I've talked to in clinic, some of them are telling me that they wake up and immediately they need to look at their phone. I've been there. I'm not going to say that it's a problem that we don't all share or many of us don't share, but immediately looking at your phone first thing in the morning, looking at it while you're brushing your teeth, playing a video while you're cooking, like these are all constant engagements and things that are distracting us from one moment to another. When we look at some of the time that we spend at the end of the day, for example, there's something that's considered maybe a more colloquial term or more of like a general term that people use called revenge scrolling, which is basically where, so it's called revenge scrolling. It basically refers to this idea that you get to the end of the day and you feel like not enough of your day was your own, and so to recoup your own time, you scroll, you go through social media, you go through these things for hours and hours, in some cases impacting your sleep, preventing you from getting a full night's rest because you feel like you're trying to get your own at the end of the day, trying to get your own time. So I share these statistics really not to shame anyone, but to show that this is the average for our current day and age. This is not something that any one person in this room is struggling with. This is not something that any one of your children, for example, is struggling with, but it's something that across the ages and across multiple countries, Egypt here is included at about 8 hours per day, is being affected from one person to another. But it's not all bad at the end of the day. I want you to think about some of the benefits of this technology, one of them being connecting to people worldwide. I don't know how many of you were here in the early 2000s, maybe in the 1900s, and used the phone cards to call family back in Egypt, struggling just to get a couple minutes, and then the line cuts out, hello, okay, bye-bye, kolokoyes, and then you leave the phone. You basically didn't have a conversation. And now you can call someone anytime you want. You can video chat with somebody anytime you want in any part of the world. Truly a marvel of technology that we should appreciate. At the same time, there's more opportunities for efficient work, more opportunities for recreation. You can book a vacation, as somebody mentioned, just by typing into ChatGPT, an AI software, and it'll give you flights, itinerary, all of your booking trips without you needing to expend nearly as much energy. And the average person who once didn't have access to nearly any information without going miles and miles to a library in a big city now has access to basically everything that humanity knows just from their own phone. Truly, if you sit down and think about this for just a moment, it's marvelous what we've done with technology. Likewise, there's avenues for entertainment. We've opened up a lot of free time in our modern age. We don't have to cook, sow, harvest, plant, all of these things that used to take up much more of our time. And as such, we have opportunities for entertainment. As problematic sometimes as we feel like these services are, video games and Netflix and all of these other streaming services provide you with a way to see parts of the world that many people otherwise, whether due to, like work obligations, financial obligations, life changes, will never really be able to experience. But it can become a problem, this technology. And I want to go through just a few different things that might indicate that somebody, whether it's yourself or whether it's a child, is having a hard time with the technology itself. If you're using it more than you want to or longer than you would like to. If you feel like you want to use it less, but feel at the same time like you're not able to do that for yourself. If you're spending a lot of time going out of your way to watch a video, to play a game on the side, if you're doing something mundane, let's say you're cooking, you're cleaning, and feel like you immediately need to pull your phone out and watch a video on the side, if you're using it even when somebody tells you that it's causing a problem, let's say you're at a dinner and somebody says, hey, like, come back to the conversation, why are you scrolling on your phone? If you're missing out, if you're late to events, if you're not able to meet the occupational, like the work requirements, the social requirements, because you're spending time on your phone or on a video game, using it over and over again, even when it puts you in danger, the immediate thought here is driving or texting while driving, something that is all too common and I won't ask for a show of hands for. Continuing to use it even when you feel like it's causing you an issue. Perhaps you're feeling depressed because you're spending most of your day in bed or on your couch scrolling through social media and feeling like this should be something you stop, but not quite doing that. Needing more and more of it, constantly watching, developing anxiety, irritability, concerns when you start not using it. And what I want to tell you right now is these are actually not official guidelines for when social media use, for when electronic use or technology use is a problem. These are the criteria for substance use disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the guideline by which we diagnose substance use, whether people are using hard drugs or other sorts of substances. But the reality is these apply in so many parts of our lives, and these are ways that we can gauge when something is causing us trouble. There isn't quite yet an official diagnosis or anything for this technology use, but the most recent part of this manual, basically the guideline for psychology, has this as something that they plan on further investigating for future iterations. And kind of bringing it home, what I want is to take a step away from kind of the formalities and a little bit closer look at what about in our day-to-day lives, when does it become a problem? And part of this becomes a problem when you feel, for example, when you ought to be taking care of your child, when you ought to be playing with them, you ought to be going out and experiencing life with them, but instead having them sit with an iPad, for example. Because the reality is it's a very easy way to keep a child quiet. It's a very easy way to keep even adults entertained, but it's not something that's bringing them benefit. It's not getting them to the next steps. It's not growing your relationship, whether it's with yourself, your friends, your children, or your loved ones. It's something that's, again, distracting in this particular use. Again, sometimes we'll notice it's a problem when instead of going through social media because you find it interesting or you're looking forward to seeing your cousin's wedding, your friend's engagement, your nephew's baptism, whatever it might be, you're instead thinking, oh, nobody liked my pictures. How many likes could I get? Why didn't people think my vacation was fun? It's when it starts to affect our self-esteem that it's a problem. But when it's a part of our enjoying what's happening around us, when it's a part of our engaging with people, that's something that's well accepted. It's, in fact, one of the best parts of the social media era that we're in. Likewise, when you're not engaging with the people around you, if, for example, you're sitting at a dinner table and you find that, maybe a couple people are talking, but you yourself are on your phone and you're kind of scrolling on the side and you're not engaging with people, this is part of when it becomes problematic. When you find that you're not doing your schoolwork, you're not doing your work, you're not going out for your marital obligations, your dates, your experiences with friends and family as a result of wanting to go home and play video games, wanting to scroll through the internet, wanting to read through social media, that's when we know it's a part of a problem. When you're spending way too much time, perhaps you're spending way too much money on the internet. Like all of these other things we've mentioned, online shopping is just as much of a difficulty in these situations as all of the others. And one thing that I think a lot of us can kind of take home is you'll know it's a problem for yourself or for those around you when you feel like you can't be honest with the people around you about how much you're using it. When you're trying to minimize how much you're using it, when you're trying to tell people it's not really getting in the way, it's not actually distracting from my work, It's something to keep in mind that, again, it's affecting all of us. And there's very good reason why it's affecting all of us. As Abuna aptly pointed out, the people who are behind the businesses of these phones, the people who are behind the businesses of these social media platforms have psychologists, have engineers, have like social media test panels, all whose primary aim is to see how can we keep you on as much as possible. Because the longer they keep you on, the longer you're engaged on your phone or playing a video game and not going out with your friends, not going out with family, not engaging in the world around you, realistically, the more money that they make. One of the things that we don't even often pay attention to, but is one of the primary ways that they keep us engaged, is just the fact that on a given phone, if you open just a stock iPhone, for example, or even an Android phone, without adding anything to it, the amount of color that you will see on that one screen is likely more than people 100 years ago experienced over months and months of their life, with the exception of going out to a field of flowers, a field of lilies, going out into the woods. And these are things that are, again, designed to keep us engaged. You can constantly scroll. And then one of the most important things is this idea of variable reinforcement. To put it very surface level, when you are engaged in gambling, for example, one of the things that makes gambling so addicting, one of the reasons why it keeps people coming back and back, is because you can pull the machine lever, you can see what you won or didn't win right away, and every once in a while, but not every time, you'll get a win. And that idea of you can keep trying and never know exactly when something good will come up is something that we have found in psychology to be incredibly addicting for the human mind. Likewise, if you're scrolling through social media and you scroll and you scroll and you scroll and there's nothing of any real substance and you don't care, but all of a sudden you come upon a meme or a video that you think is really funny or something that you thought was really entertaining, but then you keep scrolling and scrolling and there's not a lot for a little while and then something else comes up. It's that pattern that is quite intentionally designed to keep people engaged. So I say this really only to put into perspective the fact that it is not anyone's fault, really, at the end of the day, that people use their phones, that people use their technology as much as they do. But it is important to keep in mind that there is intention behind how it's keeping us engaged. But I want us to come to this idea of how do we address these things? If there's so much that we feel could be impacting our day-to-day lives, what do we do to make sure that we take control of our own things? As I mentioned before, I did focus this a little bit on working with parents and kids, but it applies to all of us. The first thing, learn about your kids, learn about yourself. What is it that's causing you to use your phone as much as it is? Ask yourself, slow down. Are there specific devices? Am I using my home computer a lot? Am I using my iPad a lot, my phone? What is it that's continuing to draw me in? Are you watching a lot of YouTube videos? Are you watching a lot of Netflix? Or are you playing video games? Are you scrolling through social media? Again, try to get a better idea of what exactly it is that keeps pulling you yourself in, or your child if you're a parent. Ask yourself then, what about these things is pulling me in? Is there something that keeps getting my attention because maybe inside I feel a little bit lonely and I want to engage with other people? Maybe inside I feel like I'm not exploring or seeing enough of life, and so I want to see it in other ways. What is it, maybe this unmet need, that perhaps I could try to address more directly? And then you'll want to ask, or have you ask rather, is it really impairing your function? Is it preventing you from doing your work, doing your schoolwork, for example? Or, like we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, is it really just the language you're using and your thoughts that are making you think something is problematic, perhaps before it is? Once you do, ask yourself or ask your kids, what is a reasonable amount of time to be using this? If, for example, we say that we spend 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day on screens, Let's say maybe 2 hours of that is on our phones on social media. Is an hour and a half okay? Is 1 hour okay? Is half an hour okay? What is a reasonable amount of time for each individual person? And there is no universal rule. In the case of parents working with kids, I highly encourage you to invite them to tell you how much is reasonable for them. Do they think they're using too much? Make this an open conversation. Give them the autonomy, the feeling like they are an adult who can make decisions when it's applicable, of course. Set limits. We'll talk about this in a little bit. Provide alternatives. Another thing that I think is very important, something we talk about a lot in the case of substance use, the criteria we talked about before. You don't take one thing away and then put nothing in its place. Anytime you take something away, you try to give something that will provide you something similar or perhaps the same kind of enjoyment or gratification as what you initially pulled. And then constantly reevaluate, constantly ask the same questions, see what could be changed. Is the change that we made working? Is there something else we need to do? More time, less time, different ways, different alternatives. And now, again, kind of going deeper and deeper into the same level, some tangible tools for those of you who would like something to take home from this talk. The first thing I think that can be incredibly helpful is the Screen Time app on Apple phones and the Digital Wellbeing app on Android. So these, as one of you very aptly pointed out, and I think many of us in this room use now, will tell you how much of my day am I spending on my phone specifically, and this is specific to phones in this case. On my phone when I spend this time, am I using it texting? Am I using it on social media? Am I using it on YouTube? Am I using it on Netflix? Am I using it on something else? It's an invaluable tool to tell you how much of your time is being spent on these things and in what specifically is it that's drawing your attention. Again, one of the most important things to address anything you think might be an issue, whether it's yourself or your kids, is to understand what it is. I will tell you, I use the Screen Time app, and every time I open it, I am still surprised by how high these numbers are. I think many of us can attest to the same. You would be surprised how much time we spend on our phones. Another tool, this again, particularly for parents with younger kids, is setting up parental controls on your home internet or your home services, your home devices. So I put up a few different examples, whether you have Verizon, whether you have Comcast, whether you have any one of the, what's that? T-Mobile, whatever service you might have, each and every one of these companies at this point in time has opportunities for parental controls. Again, I'll tell you, I personally use parental controls without having kids on my own stuff at home, and it can sometimes feel like it's a lot, but take a moment to think, particularly for those of you with young kids, how is it that I can ensure that the things that they have access to are things that I think will be helpful for them, I think will be beneficial and edifying, and try to limit the things, or even block entirely the things that could potentially cause them harm down the road. Again, for those with younger kids, or even for people of all ages really, find something that you think is beneficial, that you find to be helpful. Whether instead of watching YouTube videos, you find another streaming service like Nebula that focuses on educational programming, that focuses on teaching math and science and engineering and history and all of these things, so that again, you're not just taking away somebody's access to social media, somebody's access to YouTube, but putting in its place, again, a source of entertainment, something that we all need, but perhaps one that will be more beneficial to us. Likewise, make the time to play and watch with your kids, for those of you who are parents, with your friends, with your loved ones, for those of you who are not, to see what we're engaging in on a regular basis, how this could potentially be changed. A few other things, check in regularly. Whether it's a parent checking in on their child, a person checking in with yourself, Don't interrogate yourself. Don't ask yourself jarring questions. Don't push on yourself as if, or your child, as if you're trying to like squeeze out an admission of guilt. Approach them with curiosity. What is it that interests you? What do you find entertaining? What is it that you like? And learn from them how you could potentially help. Again, providing alternatives is incredibly important. If, for example, one of the situations that I've run into in my personal life and I've seen many times with others, when a parent has kids that are over for a get-together and the kid just sits in the corner of the room and they're scrolling on their phone, why do you think that might be? Do you feel like perhaps they're secluded from the conversation, that they're not quite part of it, that they don't know yet how to be bored, how to run around, play, explore? Perhaps when they were younger, you kind of pushed them not to make a mess, not to play, not to explore. How can we encourage them to do things without necessarily looking on your phone? Could you bring them into the conversation? Tell a story about them. Ask them to share a story about their day. Ask them to tell your friends about what they did at school, what they drew, what they learned. Take them out to parks. Give them space and give yourselves space to be kids, to be people. Help them dive into their interests. Did they tell you that they're interested in music? Did they tell you one time that they were watching videos over and over again about how to play drums or guitar? Is this something that you could bring to them? Could you show them how to play guitar? Could you get them lessons? Could you get them an instrument? Could you enroll them in band at school? How can you get them to explore the things that are not what you're trying to avoid? And then once they're there, show interest. Show them that you're interested in their hobbies. Ask them at the end of the day, what did you do today? What did you learn? What did you play? Explore with them their life. Because a lot of times what you'll find is that people will shy away from others, whether it's their loved ones, their parents, or others entirely, because they feel like those around them are not interested in them. Because it's very easy as a child to feel like you are not valued, your opinion, your experience was not something that was found important by your parents, and it's much easier to run away to your room to play video games, to talk to your friends on FaceTime, to scroll through social media, whatever it might be. Again, show them interest. And if it comes to it, which is sometimes the case, but not always, find what might be causing this excessive use of electronics. In many cases, people will feel depressed, anxious, lonely. They'll escape to their rooms. They'll sit in the quiet, the dark. They'll roll through social media. They'll scroll through Reddit, whatever it might be, in part because they're feeling depressed. Perhaps they're feeling anxious. Is there something else that you can provide for them so that they can actually address this? Give them time to mature. In many cases, there are people who feel like their kids are not getting the picture, they're not growing up, they're not, stopping the things that I want them to stop, they're not acting the way that I want them to. Give them time, particularly for, again, yourselves. Give yourselves time. There's nobody in this world who changes overnight. And if you need to, seek therapy, seek professional help. There's a reason why so many of us, as Abuna Mark pointed out, go into this field. It's not because we think nobody needs it. It's in fact because we think it's an invaluable service. And when you do need it, I hope that none of you will shy away from seeking it out. So what I want to do is wrap up with some of the key takeaways. Again, nothing is all good or all bad. It's about how you think about things. It's about how you approach things. And the key, just as it is with many other things in life, is a little bit of everything, a little bit of moderation, finding that middle ground, that narrow gate. If you're a parent talking to your kids, ask them, show curiosity, see what they're interested in. Involve them in the decisions around these things. Teach them about internet safety and put in these protocols as early as you can. And for everyone, whether you're in high school, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, or anything in between, be mindful of your use. Think about how you use it. Use the screen time apps to tell you a little bit more about what your level of use on stuff like your phones are. Avoid taking something away and not replacing it with something good. Always find a hobby, an experience, something to fill your time and fill your life with joy. Be understanding, recognize that nobody will change overnight. Not one of you will go home after this and stop using your phone and stop scrolling through social media, but you might cut down a little bit. You might start thinking about it. Give yourself time, give your kids time, and seek help when you feel like you need help. When things are overwhelming, again, there are professionals for a reason. Even before you reach professionals, reach for the folks around you, the other parents, the folks at the St. Rebecca's meeting who come here for a reason, Abuna and all of the other people in the church. Seek help when you need it. And again, I hope that each and every one of you took something away from this talk. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope that in the next few days, weeks, months, or years, you're able to use your electronics wisely, use them in a way that brings you joy and edifies you. Yeah?
I know that kids start to come, that's why you see the little
That's okay.
But how, I have something, and I know this is a struggle with adults and kids. You talked about internet, like use and scrolling and screen time, but how about addictive areas when it comes to using personal gadget, phone or iPad or even personal computer in terms of like pornography, for example. It's intrusion, like you said. I'm so happy you said that you don't have kids, but you put fences to protect yourself, which is very wise to do. But a lot of us don't do that. So I see right now the increase in intrusions with gambling, people gambling, or even playing, betting on games and stuff like that. How do you deal when things cross to that arena? I know you talked about addiction in general to the screen and attractiveness of the colors, the screen, and the surprises. That you called it the variable
Conditioning, or
like the being unpredictable.
variable reinforcement.
Reinforcement, yes. I love that. Because I think that's what drives a lot of us. And sometimes the curiosity. How to deal with that? How to recognize that you really need help if you cross to one of those areas that things now gonna escalate to a really bad territory. And I've seen marriages that ended. I've seen kids that became so addicted as young as like 8, 9, because the parents are not aware. The kids even didn't know what that is, but it's just an intrusion, when you have an intruder. So what do you advise for something like that?
So I think what Abuna is touching
Can we lower, I'm sorry, Mina. Can we lower the tone if you, kids, keep it quiet, please. We're not done yet. Adults, please not to talk. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll listen and hear you.
Yeah, so I think what Abuna's question was looking more specifically at some of the things that people find addicting, whether, again, it's the things that we talked about, the phones, the electronics, the social media, or more specifically things like gambling, whether it's sports betting or looking at gambling in general, or pornography. All of these things being very addicting in their own way. And to Abuna's credit, it is a lot because these systems are designed to keep getting you more and more involved. This idea of variable reinforcement is one that has been studied and well understood for decades, that humans really are, just like almost any animal or any creature at the end of the day, very susceptible to this idea of rewards that kind of come in surprise bursts, which is essentially what this is. The way that you and all of us really need to start addressing it, if we start to notice, whether it's in ourselves or others, that something is becoming problematic and becoming addicting, is to start by just kind of reflecting.
So recognition, first like recognition, whether it's self-recognition or someone is telling you, like pause and listen a little bit.
Exactly.
Take it to heart before fighting.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that it's something that I think a lot of us struggle with In our modern age, so many of us are just going, constantly from one event to the next, from one requirement to the next. Again, particularly as parents, there are so many things pulling you in different directions. It's hard to slow down and say, I need 10 minutes, I need 15 minutes to think about my life, to think about the things that are happening in my life. Again, whether it's these things that you're feeling are addicting, or perhaps even good things that you want to kind of cherish and remember. But I think one thing that all of us in our lives need, and something that the church teaches from the original fathers from the very beginning, is we need time to kind of sit with ourselves, to sit with God, to pray about what's happening in our lives. And it feels problematic, it feels difficult to say, I need 10 quiet minutes every day to just sit and think. And in the beginning, when you start to do something like that, it'll feel hard just to sit for those 10 minutes, but we all really need it. Not just, again, to realize when something like this is coming up, when something in your life is beginning to be a problem, but also to appreciate the good things that we have. Once you're able, or perhaps when somebody else points out to you that something is causing you difficulty, that something is preventing you from interacting with them or others, or with your work, or with school, or friends, wife, husband, whatever it might be, then we need to start thinking about these criteria that we looked at a lot for different types of addiction. Is it something that you keep needing? Do you feel like it's hard to stop? Do you wake up in the morning thinking about it? Do you go through the end of your day and feel like you're struggling to put those thoughts away? Are you constantly thinking about using it? Are you constantly thinking about how you might need to put certain things aside? These are a lot of very important questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And really, at the end of the day, all of us being here, we need to be praying about. What are the things that are causing us difficulty? When we pray at the beginning of the day, the end of the day, the middle of the day, is there something that's on our mind? Is there something that's perhaps even distracting us from prayer? And as a result, how can we start to address it? And that, I think, Abuna, comes from a couple different things. I think a lot of times in our lives, we feel like we have to address everything by ourselves. The culture that we are in here in the United States is one of very extreme individualism. But the reality is that very rarely can we do things by ourselves. If you notice that something is causing you trouble, if you notice that something is causing someone you care about trouble, reach out to someone first. Talk to somebody you know, somebody who's your spouse, your partner, your friend, perhaps somebody who's a relative, an aunt, an uncle. Abuna, of course, is a wonderful resource. Your father of confession is somebody who knows you intimately, who you can always reach out to for these things. And from there, I think there are a couple different things. I think in a lot of cases, at least for us as Christians, we involve God. We try with all of our might to bring him into our life and into our struggles so that he can carry us in those moments. But I urge you to remember that God works with us through the physical world that we live in. God interacts with each and every one of us through the people he brings around us. So at the end of the day, if you're feeling like you're struggling, you ought not to do it alone. Really, what God has brought into our lives is the people around us. Is that person, again, a friend, a loved one? Is it somebody at church? Is it Abuna? Whoever it might be, bring these problems up. See what could be done, what your options are. And if you need it, go to therapy. If you need it, seek psychiatric care. There's a reason, again, why so many of us have gone into this field. You got it.
You got it.
Any
So,
other questions?
comments?
When you're basing something with, spending time with something, should we put like educational ads or something like this, or it counts as a screen time?
So that's something that I think it depends on the age and I think it depends on really what you're trying to make use of that time. At the end of the day, you need a little bit of everything, right? But for many cases, the reality is in our world, it will be another app, it will be another service. But what I was trying to bring up in this kind of cartoonish slide is the idea that when you find an alternative, if that alternative makes sense for it to be on the iPad, makes sense for it to be portable, makes sense for it to be something while you're in the car or on the go, try to find something that's educational, try to find something that will teach them. I know even just on the way here, I was learning about all of the psychology, the education that goes into something as simple as Sesame Street. There's a lot of teaching, a lot of learning that they really try to dive into with children on those. And if your options are, like a game that doesn't bring you anything and that just kind of kills your time, or something that'll teach them something educational, do that every time. Not every time, but most of the time. The other thing is, if there are opportunities, if you have the time, or you can make the time rather, to bring your kid out to a park, to teach them how to learn an instrument, to read with them, to find something else that's not on a screen, I would encourage that as well. So the answer really is, it doesn't have to be an app. It doesn't have to be educational. It just should be something that you think will bring them more benefit down the road. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Sweet. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
So we want to thank Mina very much for coming out, and this is a gift for him on behalf of the whole St. Rebecca team. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Every time you come, we'll give you a gift, so you can come.
I only have so much wall space.
We also, Mina, we also do it to encourage, and actually the high schoolers don't know this, to encourage people to come. We do a raffle, so everybody has one of these, and